The acrid taste of smoke and concrete dust filled Captain Eva Rostova's mouth, a familiar grit she'd come to know over 3 long months in Al-Ashar. But this was different. This was the taste of a city dying. Through the Leupold Mark V HD scope of her M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, the world was a flat, magnified plain of chaos. A plume of thick black oil smoke rose from the direction of the presidential palace, a dark scar against the pale morning sky. Smaller, angrier fires dotted the urban landscape below her rooftop perch. Her ear, pressed against the stock, registered the distant crumping bass of mortars, the staccato rhythm of small arms fire, and beneath it all, the terrified symphony of a civilian population caught in the grinder. Raven 1, Raven 2, sit rep. Her spotter, Sergeant Miller, murmured from her side, his own binoculars pressed to his eyes. His voice was a low, calm rumble, a bedrock of stability in the shifting chaos. Multiple enemy elements advancing down Al-Mutanabi Street, Eva responded, her voice devoid of emotion, a professional monotone. Technicals. Looks like 24 dismounted infantry. They're pushing hard. She adjusted the focus ring minutely. A man with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher on his shoulder came into sharp relief. She tracked him, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. Not yet. The radio on her vest crackled to life, shedding the localized net for the battalion-wide frequency. The voice that emerged was strained, laced with an urgency that sent a cold trickle down Eva's spine. All call signs, this is Eagle Actual. The perimeter at Checkpoint Delta has collapsed. I say again, Delta has collapsed. All elements are ordered to disengage and fall back immediately to the green zone for evacuation. This is not a request. Acknowledge in order. A wave of confirmations flooded the channel. Hornet Actual, copy. Viper 2, copy. Shadow Team on our way. Eva keyed her own mic. Raven 1, copy. The words felt like ash in her mouth. Sergeant Miller was already moving, collapsing his tripod with practiced efficiency. You heard the man, Captain. Time to go. LZ is 5 clicks west, and it's going to be a foot race. But Eva didn't move. Her scope remained fixed on the street below. The enemy advance was a tide, and in its wake, the flotsam of the city was being swept away. And then she saw them. A flicker of movement in a shattered storefront. A woman, her brightly colored hijab a stark defiance against the gray rubble, desperately trying to pull 2 small children through a gap in a collapsed wall. They were trapped. The leading edge of the enemy force was less than a block away. Eva, Miller said, his tone shifting from procedural to personal. We have our orders. The ROE is clear. We are a screening force, not a guardian angel brigade. Look, she whispered, her eye never leaving the scope. 9 o'clock. The blue door. Miller swung his binoculars. He was silent for a 3 count. I see them. His voice was heavy. There's nothing we can do. If we stay, we die. It's that simple. It wasn't simple. It was the most complex calculation of her life. The weight of her rank, the oath she took, the lives of her team, now just Miller, versus the 3 terrified souls about to be swallowed by the storm. Her father's voice, a ghost from a memory a world away, echoed in her mind. A leader makes the hard choice, Elizaveta. The right choice is not always the easy one. It is the one you can live with. Could she live with this? Could she live with turning her back, running to safety, knowing she had condemned a mother and her children to a fate too terrible to contemplate? Raven 1, this is Eagle Actual. Confirm your movement. Your bird is on a short clock. Miller's hand was on her arm, firm. Eva, we go, now! She took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of war filling her lungs. She made the choice. She keyed her mic. Eagle Actual, this is Raven 1. I am establishing a final screening position to cover the eastern retreat. I am Oscar Mike. She was moving. Miller stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. That's suicide. You're signing your own death warrant for a maybe. I'm creating a window, Eva said, her voice now ironclad, the decision solidifying into action. She ejected the partial magazine from her rifle and slapped in a fresh one, the click a definitive sound. I'll hold this rooftop as long as I can. You fall back. Link up with Shadow Team. That's a direct order, Sergeant. The silence between them was louder than the bombardment. Miller's jaw worked, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He looked from her determined face to the street below, to the approaching enemy. With a sharp, frustrated curse, he unclipped 2 extra magazines from his own rig and placed them on the concrete parapet beside her. "Give 'em hell, Captain," he said, his voice thick. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing in the stairwell before being swallowed by the sounds of the dying city. Captain Eva Rostova was alone. She settled back into her firing position, her cheek finding its familiar weld on the stock. The crosshairs found the RPG gunner again. He was raising his weapon, aiming at a building down the street. Breath in, pause, exhale, squeeze. The rifle roared, its report a sharp personal declaration of war in the vast, impersonal chaos. The city was burning, and she had chosen to stay behind. The echo of her first shot was still hanging in the air, a sharp, fading clap that was quickly swallowed by the city's groan. The RPG gunner was down. Through the scope, she saw the other fighters scatter, their advance faltering as they searched for a threat they couldn't see. She was a ghost, a phantom in the ruins. She worked the bolt, the spent casing tinkling on the concrete beside her. The next round was already chambered. Her world had shrunk to the circle of her scope, the crosshairs, and the rhythm of her own breathing. She found her next target, a man shouting orders and pointing an AK-47. He was trying to reorganize them, to push them forward again, 500 meters. A slight breeze from the east. She adjusted the turret a single click. Her finger took up the slack. The rifle bucked again. The man with the AK spun and fell. The family below, the mother in the bright hijab, used the confusion. She shoved her 2 children through the broken wall and scrambled after them, disappearing into the labyrinth of alleyways behind the building. A small victory, a tiny flame of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Ava allowed herself a single deep breath. She low-crawled 10 feet to her left, settling behind a different chunk of shattered masonry. A good sniper never fired twice from the same position. Her father's first lesson drilled into her on the windy ranges of Quantico. She could almost smell the pine trees and gun oil, a stark contrast to the cordite and fire of Al-Ashar. He had been a formidable teacher, a man carved from granite and old-school Marine Corps tradition. He had wanted a son, he'd gotten a daughter, and for a long time she felt like a permanent disappointment. Until she outshot every other candidate in her class. A burst of enemy machine gun fire chewed up the parapet where she'd been lying seconds before. They had a general idea of her location now. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not in fear, but with a fierce, focused energy. This was what she was made for. This pressure, this clarity. She spotted the muzzle flash from a second-story window across the street. She didn't have a clean shot. Wait, be patient. The gun fired again, a long, undisciplined burst. There. A shadow moved behind the window. She exhaled slowly, her body utterly still, and squeezed the trigger. The window went dark. The brief lull that followed was filled with the crackle of the burning city. Sweat stung her eyes. She wiped her face with a grimy sleeve, her hand brushing against a small, hard rectangle in her chest pocket. Instinct made her pull it out. It was a photograph, sealed in a plastic sleeve. The colors were faded with age. It showed a young girl, no more than 7, with 2 long braids, sitting on a wooden swing. A tall man in a Marine officer's uniform was pushing her. His face, for once, not a mask of stern discipline, but softened by a genuine smile. Her father. She had carried this photo through every deployment, a complicated totem of a complicated love. He had taught her everything. How to strip a rifle blindfolded, how to read the wind, how to endure. But he had never been able to teach her how to walk away. That, she realized, she had learned from her mother. Her mother, who had waited, who had held the family together during long deployments, whose quiet strength was a different kind of courage. A courage of the heart, not the trigger finger. Looking at the photo, at her father's proud smile, she knew he would understand this decision. He might even approve. He had always said a Marine's job was to protect the helpless. It was written in their very creed. A new sound reached her, cutting through her reverie. It wasn't the roar of an explosion or the rattle of gunfire. It was the desperate, panicked voice of a woman, speaking in broken English, cutting through on a public emergency frequency anyone could access. "Please, is anyone?" "We are at Mercy Clinic. They are coming. We have wounded." Many wounded, please! Ava's blood went cold. The Mercy Clinic. She knew it. A makeshift field hospital run by a brave group of international volunteers, mostly doctors and nurses. It was less than 500 meters to the south, directly in the path of the enemy's push. They were completely exposed. She keyed her own radio, switching to that frequency. Her voice was low, calm, a lifeline thrown into the storm. Mercy Clinic, this is U.S. Army Sniper on Overwatch. I read you. I have you visual. I will provide covering fire. Get your people ready to move. It was another promise. Another weight added to the terrible growing burden on her shoulders. But as she looked once more at the faded photo of the little girl on the swing, she knew there was no other choice to make. The voice from the clinic crackled again, this time with a fragile thread of hope. American Sniper, God bless you. We have 22, mostly civilians, women, children. We are moving them to the vehicles now. Eva scanned the approaches to the low-slung, whitewashed building now marked with a large red cross. It was a magnet in a shooting gallery. Her promise felt like a thin shield against the storm gathering in the streets. Understood, Mercy Clinic. Move fast and stay low. I will handle the door. Her scope swept the rubble-choked road leading to the clinic's main entrance. Movement. 3 enemy fighters, moving with the confident swagger of hunters who believe their prey is cornered. They were setting up a light machine gun on the hood of a burnt-out car, providing a perfect base of fire to pin down anyone trying to escape. 400 meters. She calculated the wind drift, the slight downward angle. Breath in, pause, exhale, squeeze. The machine gunner slumped over his weapon. His 2 companions ducked in confusion, looking around wildly for the source of the shot. She worked the bolt, the spent cartridge gleaming in the smoky light. A second shot. One of the men searching for cover spun and fell. The third scrambled away, his courage broken. The door for the moment was clear. She heard the distinct roar of an engine, different from the others. A pickup truck with a heavy DSHK machine gun mounted in its bed turned onto the street. This was the game changer. Her 7.62mm rounds would be like throwing pebbles at a tank. The gunner swung the massive barrel towards the clinic. Ava's mind raced, discarding one impossible option after another. She keyed her command frequency, her voice urgent but controlled. Eagle Actual, Raven 1. I have a DSHK technical zeroing in on the Mercy Clinic. Request immediate air support or artillery. Danger close. My position is the clinic rooftop. The response was grim, static-laced. Raven 1, Eagle, negative on air. All assets are engaged at the green zone perimeter. Negative on artillery. You are ordered to disengage and fall back. That is a direct order, Captain. The heavy machine gun opened up, a sound like canvas tearing the sky apart. The front of the clinic erupted in a shower of plaster dust and shattered glass. She could hear screams, faint and terrified, carried on the wind. Despair, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze her. She was one person with a rifle against a weapon of war. Then a new voice cut through the chaos, crisp and unnervingly familiar. Raven 1, this is Reaper 2-2. Read you loud and clear. I am your cavalry, passing Angels 20, low on gas and out of ideas, but I've got one hell of a parting gift. Eva's heart leapt. Reaper, this is Raven. I read you. Can you engage? She fumbled for the laser designator attached to her webbing. Affirmative, Raven. My TADS is painting the whole ugly picture. Just light it up for me. Make it pretty. She shouldered the designator, the heavy unit feeling like an extension of her own will. She centered the laser's invisible dot on the side of the Technical's engine block. Reaper, laser is on. Hotspot is the vehicle. Roger, I have the spot. Stand by for fireworks. Recommend you find some deep cover, Raven. This is gonna be close. Eva didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled back from the parapet, pressing herself against the base of a large air conditioning unit, squeezing her eyes shut and opening her mouth to equalize the pressure. The world seemed to hold its breath for a single eternal second. Then the sky fell, a deafening roar. A shockwave that punched the air from her lungs and shook the very foundations of the building, a blast of heat and debris that washed over the rooftop. When she dared to look, the Technical was a blackened, twisted skeleton, burning fiercely. The street around it was scarred and empty. She keyed the laser's talk button, her voice shaking with adrenaline and relief. Reaper, good effect on target. Scratch one technical. You just saved a lot of lives. Anytime, Raven. Consider my debt from Top Gun paid. Now get the hell out of there! The F-16's roar faded into the distance, a fleeting angel of vengeance. Eva crawled back to her rifle, her ears ringing. The immediate threat was gone, but the silence it left behind was deceptive. She had drawn too much attention. The enemy knew a professional was here, and they would not let such an insult stand. As she scanned the surrounding buildings, a glint of light from a window 3 blocks away caught her eye. It wasn't the glint of glass. It was the brief telltale reflection of an optical lens. They had sent their own. The duel for the clinic was over. The duel for her life was about to begin. The glint from the distant window vanished as quickly as it had appeared. But the feeling it left behind was a cold weight in Eva's stomach. They had sent a hunter for the hunter. This changed everything. The clinic, the evacuees, the burning city, all of it faded into a secondary concern. Her world now consisted of 2 rooftops and the deadly space between them. She became a statue, her eye never leaving the area where she'd seen the reflection. Every instinct screamed at her to move, but movement would betray her position. Patience was her only weapon now. A bullet snapped past her head, so close she felt the wind of its passage. The report of the shot reached her a split second later, a flat, authoritative crack that was different from the ragged enemy fire she'd been hearing. It was the sound of a precision rifle. He had taken the first shot, a probing shot, hoping she'd panic and reveal herself. She didn't. She barely breathed. He knew her general location. She knew his exact one. That was her only advantage. She low-crawled an inch at a time, pushing with her toes and pulling with her elbows, making no sound, disturbing no dust. She moved from behind the shattered air conditioner unit to the skeletal remains of a satellite dish. It offered less cover, but a slightly different angle. She needed to see his firing port. She settled in, her body coiled tight, every sense screaming. The city's cacophony became her ally, masking the tiny sounds of her movement. She watched the window. 3 blocks. An office building, maybe? He would be tucked back in the shadows, impossible to see. She had to wait for him to fire again. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Sweat trickled down her temple, a maddening itch she dared not scratch. She thought of the clinic. She could hear the sputtering start of an engine, then another. They were getting the vehicles moving. Her promise was being kept, but her own survival was now a thread hanging by a moment. Her father's voice was back, calm and steady in her mind. The enemy is human. He will make a mistake. He will get impatient. You just have to be ready. Then she saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible shift in the darkness of the window. A muzzle, no more than an inch of it, edging out from the shadows. He was repositioning, searching for a better angle on her last known position. It was all she needed. Her crosshairs were already on the center of the window. She didn't have a clear shot at the shooter, but she didn't need one. Not yet. She estimated his position based on the barrel's angle. He was to the right of the window, slightly back. She took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was a gamble. Her round tore through the upper corner of the window frame, sending a shower of concrete and glass into the room. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to startle, to intimidate, to make him flinch. She worked the bolt and fired again, lower this time, blowing chunks out of the windowsill. A suppressing fire drill. 2 shots, methodical, punishing. She saw the muzzle of his rifle jerk back in surprise. It was the reaction she'd hoped for. In that split second of his surprise, she moved. She erupted from her position, sprinting in a low crouch across the open rooftop. She didn't look back. She dove behind a large metal ventilation shaft, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild bird. She'd given him a new position to think about. The game was reset. Silence. He was assessing just as she was. He knew she was skilled now. This was no longer a simple execution. It was a duel between professionals. She risked a glance around the edge of the vent. Nothing. The window was a dark, empty square again. The evac convoy from the clinic was moving now. She could hear the engines groaning under the strain, picking up speed. They were almost clear. She had held the line, but her own escape route was cut off. The enemy sniper held the key to the only door off this rooftop: time. He just had to keep her pinned here until his comrades closed in. She was running out of it. and she was running out of ammunition. She checked her mag. She had 3 rounds left. The silence was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. It was broken only by the fading sound of the clinic's vehicles, a sound that meant victory and abandonment in the same breath. They were safe. She was trapped. 3 rounds. The number echoed in her mind. 3 chances to win a duel against an unseen enemy who held all the advantages of time and position. She pressed her back against the cold metal of the ventilation shaft, the reality of her situation settling like a stone in her gut. This rooftop had been her fortress. Now it was her tomb. A sharp crack and a simultaneous spark off the vent, inches from her head, shattered the stillness. He was zeroing in. He had deduced her position. The next shot would be through the metal. She had to move. Now. Gritting her teeth, she launched herself forward, not back to her original spot, but laterally, towards the low wall at the roof's edge. It was a desperate gamble, a move to an exposed position he wouldn't expect. A bullet kicked up concrete at her heels as she dove, sliding the last few feet on her stomach. She was now at the very front of the building, the burning city spread out below her like a map of hell. She had his attention, but she still didn't have a target. Think. He was good, disciplined. He wouldn't fire twice from the same spot. He would be shifting now, too. Where? Her eyes, frantic, scanned the opposing building, not the windows directly opposite. He'd know she'd be watching those. The roof. Was there access to the roof? Her gaze swept across the parapet of the office building. There. A flicker. A slight distortion in the heat haze rising from the fires below. A head encased in a ghillie hood rising just above the roofline. He had taken the high ground. He was now looking down on her. Their eyes met across the 300 meters of smoky air. It was an impossible, intimate connection between 2 people trying to end each other's lives. She saw the glint of his scope. He saw the determination on her face. There was no time to aim. It was pure instinct. As his rifle flashed, she rolled. The round tore through the space where her head had been a fraction of a second before. She came up on one knee, her rifle already shouldered. He was exposed, recovering from his shot. It was the mistake her father said he would make. She didn't have a perfect sight picture. It was a snapshot, a hunter's shot. She fired. The shot felt wrong, the recoil jarring her bruised shoulder. Through her scope, she saw a spray of dark material puff from the ghillie hood near his shoulder. He jerked back and disappeared from view. A hit, but not a kill. A wound. An injury that would make him angry, more dangerous, but perhaps slower. A new sound cut through the adrenaline roaring in her ears. The distinct, beautiful, thundering rhythm of a Black Hawk helicopter. It swooped in from behind her building, a massive, powerful angel of mercy. It flared above her rooftop, its downdraft whipping the smoke into a frenzy and stinging her eyes with grit. The crew chief, anchored to the deck, was waving frantically at her, his mouth open in a shout she couldn't hear over the rotor wash. The skids hovered just feet above the roof. This was it. Her ride, her salvation. But as the helicopter presented itself, a new horror unfolded. From a side street, a group of enemy fighters emerged, raising their rifles. They were going to shoot the helicopter out of the sky. They were going to kill her rescuers and condemn her to die here alone. The wounded sniper on the other roof no longer mattered. This was the final test. Eva Rostova rose to her full height. She ignored the searing pain in her shoulder. She ignored the bullets now snapping past her from the street below. She ignored the crew chief's desperate screams to get on. She stood in the open, a perfect target, and shouldered her rifle for the last time. She had 2 rounds left. She ejected the partial magazine and slammed her final full magazine home. The bolt snapped forward, chambering a round. 1 in the chamber, 20 in the mag. 21 chances to hold the door open one last time. She centered her crosshairs on the lead fighter in the street below and began to work. Each shot was measured, precise, a brutal counterpoint to their wild firing. She was no longer a sniper dueling for her life. She was a soldier, expending her last breaths to protect others. She fired until the bolt locked open on an empty chamber, the smoke from her rifle blending with the smoke of the burning city. The final shot echoed across the rooftop, a flat, empty clap that signaled the end. The bolt of her M2010 locked back, the chamber smoking and bare. Below, the street was littered with the fallen, the enemy assault broken and scattered by her relentless final volley. A profound silence descended, broken only by the heavy rhythmic thump of the Black Hawk's rotors. The crew chief, his face a mask of awe and terror, reached out a hand, his mouth still forming words she could not hear. "Come on!" But Ava did not move. The adrenaline that had been a roaring fire in her veins was now cold ash. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion settled into her, so profound it felt like a physical weight pinning her to the rooftop. She had done it. The clinic was safe. The helicopter was safe. She had held the line. The cost of that victory was a sudden, deafening emptiness. She looked at her hands, raw and trembling, still curled around the hot, useless metal of her rifle. She had given everything. There was nothing left. The crew chief, seeing her hesitation, unhooked his safety tether and took 2 steps onto the roof, grabbing her armored vest. "Captain! We have to go now!" His voice was a distant buzz, barely registering. She allowed herself to be pulled, her legs moving on some deep-seated instinct, carrying her toward the waiting aircraft. It was a slow, dreamlike walk. She was not running for her life. She was walking away from it. As she reached the skid, her boots scraping against the metal, she turned for one last look. The city of Al-Ashar sprawled before her, a panorama of destruction she had shaped with her own will. Pillars of black smoke climbed into the bruised sky. Fires glowed in the gathering dusk. Somewhere down there was the family in the bright hijab. Somewhere were the doctors from the clinic. Somewhere was the enemy sniper, wounded and bitter. And somewhere, lost in the rubble, was the ghost of the soldier she had been when the sun rose that morning. She had chosen to stay behind, and a part of her would forever remain on this rooftop, in this city. The crew chief hauled her into the belly of the helicopter. The world erupted into a deafening roar of wind and engine noise. The floor lurched beneath her feet as the Black Hawk clawed for altitude, banking away from the inferno. She collapsed onto the red webbing of the seat, her body finally surrendering to the tremors she had been suppressing for hours. A medic was suddenly there, checking her for wounds, his hands quick and professional. He pointed to a dark stain on her uniform sleeve, the graze from the sniper's bullet she had forgotten. She waved him away, a slow, dismissive motion. It was nothing. She looked at the other passengers. Sergeant Miller was there, his face etched with a mixture of relief and something else. A deep, profound respect. He gave her a slow, single nod. It was all that needed to be said. The other rangers in the cabin looked at her not with pity, but with a quiet reverence. They had heard the radio traffic. They knew what she had done. Ava leaned her head back against the vibrating fuselage, closing her eyes. The mission was over. The immediate fight was won. But as the helicopter carried her away from the burning city, she knew the real battle was just beginning. The battle to reconcile the soldier with the woman. The battle to carry the weight of the lives saved and the lives taken. The battle to find a way to live with the choice she had made. She had chosen to stay behind, and in doing so, she had forged a new self in the fires of Al-Ashar. The journey home would be the longest mission of her life. The roar of the Black Hawk was a physical thing, vibrating up through the deck plates and into Ava's very bones. It was the sound of survival. Outside the open door, the burning city of Al-Ashar receded, transforming from a terrifying, intimate landscape of death into a silent, orange-scarred painting, beautiful and terrible from a distance. No one in the cabin spoke. The Rangers sat in a stunned silence, the adrenaline drain leaving them hollowed out. Sergeant Miller reached over and placed a hand on her knee, a solid, grounding weight. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the disappearing horizon. The helicopter banked, and a glint of metal caught her eye. It was her rifle, lying on the deck where she had dropped it. The once pristine barrel was scorched and smudged. The stock was scratched raw from the rubble. It looked as battered and used as she felt. A medic approached her again, holding a pressure bandage for the graze on her arm. This time she didn't wave him off. As he worked, cleaning the cut with a sterile wipe that stung with a clean, honest pain, her mind didn't go to the duel or the storm of gunfire. It went to a quiet evening on the porch of her childhood home. She saw her father, not as the stern general, but as a tired man still getting used to the quiet of retirement. He'd held her service rifle, the one she'd just qualified with a kind of reverence. "It's a tool, Elizaveta," he had said, his voice softer than usual. "A terrible necessary tool. But the weight of it isn't in the metal and polymer. The weight is in the choice you make every time you pick it up. To protect or to destroy. Never forget that the choice is yours, and yours alone." Back then, it had seemed like philosophical musing. Now, sitting in the shuddering helicopter, the smell of smoke and blood clinging to her, she understood it was a prophecy. The memory shifted. It was her mother, a year later, standing at the same kitchen window, watching a rainstorm. "He talks about the weight of the weapon," her mother had said, her voice always so calm, a balm to her father's intensity. "But he never talks about the weight of the waiting. The weight of the love you have to carry for them while they are gone. That is a different kind of courage, Eva. It's a courage of the heart." She had handed Eva a cup of tea. "Don't ever let the steel harden your heart. The world needs soldiers, but it needs compassionate soldiers even more." A sudden, violent tremor shook the helicopter, pulling her back to the present. A voice yelled, "Turbulence! We're hitting the thermal drafts from the fires!" The aircraft bucked and dropped, her stomach lurching into her throat. For a terrifying second, she was back on the rooftop, the world exploding around her. She gripped the webbing of her seat, her knuckles white. The fear was a live wire, sharp and immediate. But beneath it, something else was solidifying, a core of calm. She had faced the abyss. She had stared into it and held her ground. A little turbulence was nothing. The shaking subsided. The flight smoothed out. The medic finished his work and moved away. Eva looked down at her hands, now still. The trembling had stopped. She looked from her scarred rifle on the floor to the faces of the young rangers across from her. They were watching her, their eyes wide. They had seen her stand on that roof. They had seen her empty her rifle to save them. She was no longer just Captain Rostova. She was a story they would tell. She thought of the family and the bright hijab. She thought of the doctors at the clinic. She thought of the wounded enemy sniper, a complex tapestry of humanity, all connected by her choices. Her father was right about the weight of the weapon. Her mother was right about the courage of the heart. She had carried both. She had not been hardened. She had been tempered. The helicopter flew on, carrying her away from the war, but the war had forged something new inside her. She closed her eyes, not in exhaustion but in acceptance. The battle was over. The healing could now begin. The wheels of the C-17 Globemaster touched down with a shriek of rubber on the pristine, undamaged tarmac of Ramstein Air Base. The sound was a jarring contrast to the cacophony of war that had been Eva's world for the last 24 hours. The giant cargo plane taxied to a halt, and the rear ramp hissed open, flooding the dim hold with clean German sunlight. Eva blinked against the glare, the simple, wholesome light feeling alien on her skin. She stood, her body protesting every movement, and joined the silent, shuffling line of soldiers disembarking. The air outside was cool and smelled of jet fuel and cut grass. It was the most wonderful scent she had ever experienced. A formation of crisp, clean uniformed personnel was there to greet them, a world away from the dust-covered ghosts stepping off the plane. A master sergeant with a clipboard called out names, his voice efficient and unnervingly normal. "Rostova, E.L." "Here, Sergeant," she said. Her own voice a dry rasp. He looked up from his clipboard, his professional demeanor faltering for a second as he took in her battered gear, the fresh bandage on her arm, and the hollow look in her eyes that no amount of sleep would quickly erase. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod of respect that was more powerful than any salute. "Welcome home, Captain." The word home felt strange and distant. Home was a concept, a memory of a quiet apartment she hadn't seen in 9 months. This was just a waypoint. The Army processed them with a gentle, practiced efficiency. There were medics to check their wounds, hot food that tasted like ambrosia, and a chance to finally, truly clean the grime of Al-Ashar from their pores. Later, standing under a stream of scalding hot water in the transient quarters, she watched the water at her feet run brown, then pink, then finally clear. The physical evidence of the city was washing away, but she knew the stain had seeped in much deeper. The next morning, she was summoned to the base commander's office. She expected a debriefing, a dry recounting of tactical decisions and enemy strength. She walked in, wearing a fresh standard-issue uniform that felt stiff and unfamiliar, and came to a halt. Seated in front of the colonel's large polished desk was her father. General Rostova stood up. He was out of uniform, wearing a simple polo shirt and slacks, looking every bit the retired officer. But his posture was still ramrod straight. His eyes, the same steely gray as her own, met hers, and in them she saw none of the critical assessment she had spent her life preparing for. She saw a profound, overwhelming relief. He didn't say a word. He simply closed the distance between them in 3 long strides and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a crushing embrace. It was the first time he had hugged her since she was a little girl. She stood stiffly for a moment, shocked, before her own arms came up and she buried her face in his shoulder. The starched newness of her uniform pressed against his soft cotton shirt. "I saw the preliminary report," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "They're calling it one of the most courageous acts of individual gallantry they've seen." She pulled back slightly, shaking her head. "It wasn't gallantry, Dad. It was just the only choice." He held her by the shoulders, his grip firm. "I know. That's what makes it gallantry. You saw the hard right instead of the easy wrong, and you chose it. You chose it knowing the cost." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and she saw the ghost of the man who had pushed her on the swing in the faded photograph. "I was wrong, Elizaveta. All those years pushing you, wanting you to be the best. I was preparing you for a moment I hoped you would never see. And when you saw it, you were everything I ever hoped a Marine could be. No, you were more." Tears she had not allowed herself to cry, not on the rooftop, not in the helicopter, finally welled in her eyes. It wasn't his praise that broke her. It was his understanding. He knew the weight of the choice. He had carried it himself. Weeks later, at a small private ceremony at Fort Bragg, a different general stood before her. He spoke of duty, sacrifice, and the lives saved at the Mercy Clinic. He pinned the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor, to her chest. The medal was cool against her uniform. The applause from the small gathered crowd was respectful. But as she stood at attention, her eyes swept past the general, past the flags, and found her father and mother standing together in the front row. Her mother was crying quiet, happy tears. Her father stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his chest puffed out with a pride so immense it seemed to fill the room. In that moment, the medal on her chest didn't feel like a reward for a single day of hell. It felt like a recognition of the entire journey. The little girl on the swing, the woman on the rooftop, the soldier coming home, they were all connected. The city had burned, and she had chosen to stay behind. But she had not been left behind. She had found herself there, and in doing so, she had finally come all the way home.